What's up guys, and welcome. Today we're going to be talking all about the Allies. Now this video is going to be pretty long because we're going to have 6 separate powers to talk about. So bear with me here. Remember that I timestamp all my videos in the description if you'd like to skip around or come back and view specific parts at any time. So that being said, we are going to start off with the Commonwealth, being Great Britain, FEC, and the ANZAC. Then we'll move on to France and Free France, then on to the United States, and finally KMT. All right, let's go. Okay, starting off as always with the British National Reference Sheet here. You'll notice that they start with 11 IPPs per turn out of a possible 25. That's going to be their wartime income. Moving on, the first thing to notice here is this British Commonwealth tab. That just says that Great Britain, Far East Command, and ANZAC all take their turns at the same time, and they share Lend-Lease limits and strategic naval movement limits, which I haven't explained strategic naval movement yet. That's going to come in a later video. It's also worth mentioning quickly that Canada is a part of Great Britain. You just get their income and you can build their facilities there. For all intents and purposes, they are the same. They just have a different roundel up there. That's the only difference. Again, as always, read your wartime bonus income and your victory points. Okay, moving on to probably the most important part of these reference sheets are going to be your peacetime income increases. As I mentioned earlier, you start at 11 out of a possible 25. So you still have 14 to go up before you can declare war on anybody. So just like the Russians, starting in 1939, you get a D12 per turn. I'm going to be honest with you, you're probably not going to get to this roll, depending on what the Germans do. If Germany or Italy declares war on the USSR, you get a D12. You know, stuff like that. Just read these. The big ones to remember are going to be Germany annexing Austria, Bohemia, Slovakia. Those are probably going to happen in the first 3 turns. So you'll get $1 extra each time the German player does that. And then once the German player declares war on France, you go straight up to your wartime income. So those are probably going to be the 2 most important ones that you get. If the German player doesn't declare war on France right away, this 2D12, if he declares war on, say, Poland as a neutral, will probably get you up to your wartime just with those. In terms of British special abilities, the only one you have is going to be this Dutch colony here. And just what that means is if Japan or, say the Comintern declares war on the Netherlands and Great Britain is not at war yet, the Netherlands become a controlled minor of the British, with the exception being that the British are able to collect income for Dutch territory. If you'll recall, when neutral minors become controlled minors of a major power, that major power does not receive income until it fully aligns the minor power. So the difference here being that the British can receive income for the Dutch while they are a controlled minor. So that's kind of cool. In terms of special units, all they have is colonial infantry. We've seen this before with the Italians. It's just an infantry that you can build without a factory, and it just costs $1 extra. All right, let's move on to the board. Now, British Lend-Lease is pretty easy. At the start of the game, you can't Lend-Lease to anybody. And at no point in the game can you Lend-Lease to Far East Command or ANZAC, given that they are basically the same power as Great Britain, so you can't really Lend-Lease to them. Other than that, once Great Britain is at war with a major power, they can Lend-Lease to anybody in the game. So that's nice. Great Britain's Lend-Lease is pretty simple. You're going to see with the Americans later that they can get it to be pretty complicated. So Great Britain's got it easy. Okay, last thing to cover here for Great Britain is going to be its declarations of war. Now, as opposed to the Comintern, who also has to build up to a wartime income, the Allied nations cannot declare war until they have reached their wartime income. So Great Britain will be at peace until its income is at least $25 per turn, that starting land value that you saw on the chart in the reference sheet, at which point Great Britain can declare war on an Axis power that has declared war on another country. So for example, if Germany's declared war on a neutral, if that gets Great Britain up to its 25 IPP income, then it can then turn around and declare war on Germany. In addition, since the Allies are quote-unquote the good guys in this war, they have severe penalties for declaring war on neutrals. So I'm just going to show you this one because it's close. If for whatever reason the British player has to declare war on Ireland, the Allies combined, so all the 6 powers that I listed at the start of this video, Great Britain, FEC, ANZAC, France, the United States, have to pay a combined 10 IPPs to the bank, just straight up lose them. And then also the Americans lose 8 IPPs to their per turn income, which is going to delay them getting into the war, probably by at least a turn or 2. So if you're the Allied player and you want to declare war on a neutral, think very carefully before you do so. And that is all I got for Great Britain. Let's move on to FEC. Alright, starting here with the Far East Command. Again, first thing we'll notice, in 1936 they start with 5 IPPs per turn out of a possible 14. Now this doesn't much matter for FEC because Great Britain handles all war declarations. So if, for example, FEC isn't quite up to 14 yet and Great Britain declares war on Germany, then FEC is still at war with Germany. FEC is not going to be doing any declarations of war. It's all going to be handled by Great Britain. A unique thing about FEC is it does not have a home country. So any tech the Commonwealth gets, FEC cannot build because they are technically not home country. And you can only build units earned from tech in home country. Moving down, a difference between FEC Lend-Lease and Great Britain Lend-Lease. The only difference is FEC can Lend-Lease to the KMT before the FEC is at war. So if you'll recall to the Great Britain reference sheet, Great Britain cannot Lend-Lease until Great Britain is at war with another major power. FEC is the exact same, except it can Lend-Lease to the KMT before the FEC is at war, if the KMT is at war with a major power. Now I just threw a lot of words and names at you, so that can probably be difficult to understand. Your most important takeaway here is just that FEC Lend-Lease is a little bit different, and you should read that carefully in your reference sheet. Next up, wartime bonus income and its lone victory point, which is honestly pretty hard to score. So FEC is not a huge player in this game, but it does play an important role nonetheless. Now here is its peacetime income increases. One thing to note is that starting in 1939, you only get a D6 instead of a D12 here, so you roll a 6-sided die instead of a 12-sided die to increase your income. And your income increases based on Japanese moves. And finally here, the FEC has 2 unique units, one being the Colonial Infantry, which I've already talked about. The next being a Gurkha, which is a very, very cool unit, and I like them a lot. They're basically mountain infantry that also have a bonus in the jungle and can be built anywhere in FEC territory. So they're pretty cool. And that's about all I got for the FEC. One last thing that I feel is important to note, because it can be easily overlooked, is that FEC cannot build ships to start the game because it does not have a major or minor shipyard. So if you want the FEC itself to build ships, you're going to have to throw down a shipyard at some point, which takes 2 or 3 turns depending on which one you want to build. So keep that in mind. The FEC cannot build ships at the beginning of the game. I'm going to go over what shipyards do and how they function in a later video when I discuss facilities. But it's kind of a big deal, and I think it's worth mentioning in this video that the FEC cannot build ships at the beginning of the game. All right, let's move on to the ANZAC. Okay, moving on to ANZAC here, looking at the reference sheet. Again, they've got a booming economy of 3 IPPs per turn to start, up to a maximum of 7, which is very low. ANZAC doesn't do a whole lot in this game, though, again, just like the FEC, they play a very important role. They've only got 1 victory point here that's scoreable, which is, in my opinion, a little bit easier to get than the FEC point. And your peacetime income increases are going to be based on the Netherlands and Japanese aggressive actions. In terms of Lend-Lease, it has the same Lend-Lease rules as the FEC, which are slightly different from Great Britain. Just this little KMT stipulation here is the only thing that's different from Great Britain Lend-Lease. And the only ANZAC unique unit is going to be a colonial infantry here, just like the other Commonwealth nations. And that's about all we got for the ANZAC, guys. There's not a whole lot to say about them. They do have a shipyard here, so they, as opposed to the FEC, can build non-capital ships to start the game, so that they get a little bit of a head start on the FEC in that regard. Other than that, there's not a whole lot. They've only got one wartime bonus income objective. They've only got one victory objective. So their focus is going to be pretty small scale. They don't have a ton of money, but they can get to be scary for the Japanese if they receive some good Lend-Lease from, say, the Americans. All right, let's move on to the French. Okay, looking at the French reference sheet, you see that we start at 6 IPPs per turn out of a possible 18. And just like the British, you cannot declare war on anybody until you reach your full wartime income of 18 IPPs per turn. Another quirk about France is they've got this Maginot Line, which is a static fortification right here on this border. And it's basically just like a juiced up fortification. You can see its stats here. It's really good, and it's going to be tough for the Germans to cross. You've also got this demilitarized border with Belgium, which means you can't build a fortification on that border between Picardy and Belgium. One last thing that hurts the French is after France is at war, it cannot go into German or Italian home country until it has taken a full turn at war. And again, just always look at your victory objectives and wartime bonus income. This one in particular is going to be pretty hard to get on account of the Southeast Asian territories over here. Good luck getting those back, but you know, it's worth a shot. And of course, here are your peacetime income increases, just like the Commonwealth. Pay attention to these. This is probably going to be your only source of bonuses in the early game, and then just Germany's going to declare war on you, and that's probably what's going to get you up if you even survive that round, you know. So these two right here can get you $4, and that's probably all that's going to happen in that early game. And your declarations of war are going to be just like the Commonwealth. So you have to get to your wartime income, and then you can declare war on a nation that has declared war on another nation. And obviously I talked about being able to declare war on the Soviet Union in the Soviet Union video. France has two unique units here, one being colonial infantry, similar to the Commonwealth, and then this one, the French Foreign Legion, is basically a colonial infantry that does not suffer desert penalties. So that's going to be nice if you're able to retain North Africa up here. In terms of onboard stuff, there's not much that I can show you. Just remember that you've got the Maginot Line right here in between Bavaria and Alsace-Lorraine. And then also you can't build fortifications on a neutral Belgium line. Other than that, the early game is just going to be setting up your defense, trying to hurt Germany as much as possible before you die. You know, normal France isn't long for the game. So yeah, let's move on to Free France. Okay, checking out the Free French reference sheet here. It's going to be a little bit weird because obviously you're going to just have like a random setup of French territories all over the world. Because of those Vichy rolls that are going to happen, it's going to be 50-50 for each clump of territory. So you're going to have anywhere from, you know, 0 to 4 or 5 IPPs per turn, depending on how the rolls go. So that's why this is blank. But your war status here, this is important. You're actually, as opposed to Vichy France, Free France is still at war with all countries that it was at war with before France falls. So obviously you're probably going to be at war with Germany, which means Germany can attack Free French land zones, which is different than the Vichy. Remember, because the Vichy are a neutral minor and cannot be attacked by the Allies unless they want to pay the penalty for it. So that's an interesting thing to note. Your home country is still Paris, so you don't really have a home country. Your building is going to be very, very limited until you build a factory or something. So now the way this is going to work is after the German player makes all his Vichy rolls and you figure out kind of how much territory you have, You can choose any free French territory on the board as your capital, and that is going to be a super important choice because that is where you're going to receive your Lend-Lease at. So you probably don't want to choose Western Algeria as your capital. You can't really get Lend-Lease there. Say you have Morocco here, you can't receive Lend-Lease in Morocco because it doesn't have a port, right? Or if you were to choose Mauritania down here, see, Mauritania only has a minor port, so you're only going to be able to receive infantry at this port. So your decision is going to be pretty big. Syria is a good one because you've got a major port here, and you can receive, any unit there that, say, the Americans want to send you. So that's how your capital works. Free France never surrenders. So if you lose your capital, you just choose a new one. But yeah, it's a pretty important choice because Free France is going to want a lot of the Lend-Lease to try to get their territory back and get some income back. As I mentioned, Free France never surrenders. So you just stay a minor power until Paris is recaptured, in which case you just become plain old France again, and you can continue with your tech rolls. The minor that is Free France does not get tech rolls. Another important thing about Free France is it is able to attack Vichy France without it being a declaration of war. Free France and Vichy France start at war, so it's called an internal conflict. Any Free French attack on Vichy France does not make Vichy France aligned to Germany. A couple more things to mention. Your victory points are exactly the same, so even if Paris is never recaptured, you can still earn your victory points as the Free French. Your declarations of war are going to be the exact same as the normal French. And Free France can build factories in their territories, any territory they owned. Until that point, though, they can only build these 4 units, similar to the Chinese. Only infantry, militia, cavalry, and mountain infantry. And you can build these in any territory you've owned since the beginning of your turn. So they are very similar to the Chinese in this fact. They can build these units in any territory they own. Once the Free French build a factory somewhere in a territory that they own, they can build from the full French build chart at that factory. All right, that's all I got for Free France. Let's move on to the United States. Okay, looking at the United States National Reference Sheet here, you'll see that they start with only 6 IPPs per turn out of a possible 63, which that is to represent the isolationist values of the United States during this period. So it's going to be a really, really long time before they even enter the war. But there are a lot of other important things that the U.S. does before they enter the war. So I'll talk about those in a second. I'm going to explain all this stuff over on the board, so I'll get to that in a second. Again, always read your victory objectives. Most of them are pretty similar to the other Allied powers like contain fascism and contain communism. And here's going to be your list of peacetime income increases. This is going to be a big one for you. Starting in 1939, you just get a D12 every turn. That's probably going to be your main source of income increases. Other than that, most of it has to do with Japan and what Japan does, and you just get +5 each time Germany or Italy goes to war. Other than that, it's mostly going to be Japanese actions that give you income. And just to reiterate, each time the Commonwealth or France declares war on a neutral minor, you lose $8 in per term income, so it's going to take you longer to get to the war if they do that. Your only wartime bonus income is to just own the continental United States. So this one is basically going to be a gimme. They're going to have a ton of money every turn. I think that equals up to 75 if you add 63 plus 12. So the United States are going to be a beast at the end of the game. Declarations of war are going to be identical to Great Britain. So no changes there. You just have to get to your wartime income, and then you can probably declare war on Germany and Japan, assuming that they're already at war, and they probably will be. And then Comintern powers are the same. I explained that in the Comintern video. In terms of unique units, they've only got the United States Marine Corps here, which is an elite Marine. It's going to be identical to the Japanese unique Marines, so those are going to be sweet for you. All right, let's move on to the board. Now, the U.S. is a unique major power in the sense that it can do basically nothing at the start of the game. So if you look on your reference sheet, it says that the USA is limited in its ability to lend, lease, move, and build by its income level. which just means at the start of the game, you can do nothing except move units within home country. You can't move your ships, you can't move these planes. You can move this plane because it's in the continental United States, but you can't move these guys off the carriers. So literally all you can do is build at these factories and move units inside the United States. Now if we move over to our reference sheet here, it tells you what you can do once you hit a certain income level. So once your income hits 15 IPPs per turn, you can close the Panama Canal to nations. I've never seen this be important, but it could be if the Japanese decide to get a little weird, or the Germans. But the important part of this one is you may start lend-leasing to nations at war with a major power once you hit 15 IPPs. This is probably going to be the most important function of the United States in the early game before they get to war. It's very effective if you just start lend-leasing like crazy. They're going to have a lot of money to spend and not a whole lot to do with it. So the US can be very effective in the early game by sending units to ANZAC or to Great Britain. Now you can only lend-lease to one of those per turn since they share lend-lease limits. So you can send a unit to Great Britain or FEC or ANZAC on each turn. You can lend-lease to Russia if they're getting crushed. You can lend-lease to minors that are at war with a major power. So say Japan declares war on the Netherlands, but Germany hasn't yet. You can send units to the Netherlands in Europe because they'll be at war with Japan, and that can make Germany's life harder in the future. Things like that. United States lend-lease in the early game is a very, very important part of this game. Next up on our list here is at 35 IPPs, you can move ships in the Pacific and build facilities. They have to end their movement adjacent to a U.S. controlled territory. So for example, you can, much like the U.S. actually did, you can move your fleet out here to the Hawaiian Island. Again, that probably leaves you open to a Japanese surprise attack. So maybe you don't want to do that, but an important thing to note here is that this includes militia, so you can't build militia, say, in the Philippines here until you reach that 35 IPP income. Until that point, this is all you can have in the Philippines. And once you hit 35 IPPs, you can get these two ships out of there. You can move them over to Wake, and then on to Hawaii, and then on to home, but that's at 35 IPPs. Another important thing to note is this is specific to the Pacific. Once you hit 35 IPPs, you still cannot move your Atlantic fleet. They're just kind of stuck there unless they are to perform escort duty. So for example, you can move like destroyers or surface ships out here under these convoy lines to perform escort duty. That's the only reason you can move your Atlantic fleet at 35 IPPs. Other than that, they're stuck. Again, you can read all this yourself, so I'm just going to go over it quickly. At 50 IPPs, you can engage Italian and German naval forces within 2 sea zones of the United States home country. So all throughout here, you can engage Italian or German units that happen to wander out there. It doesn't happen very often, but that finally gives you an excuse to move your Atlantic fleet. And then, of course, at 63 IPPs, you are at your full wartime income, and you can declare war and move your ships freely. Another thing to note, there's a special ability for the United States called the Monroe Doctrine. That just means that down here in South America, if there are any Axis or Comintern units within or in the sea zones adjacent to South America, or if they have land units within South America, the United States fleet can move down there and attack them without a declaration of war. This is just a little historically accurate thing that happens. The Monroe Doctrine was a very real thing. They took it very seriously. So, again, that gives you an excuse to kind of consolidate your fleet. If, however, the German or Italian or Russian units were to move away at any point and be out of the range of the Monroe Doctrine, your fleet would have to return to port to an adjacent sea zone to the United States. But it does kind of give you a good excuse to move your fleet, so you could consolidate them down here if you wanted, or you could move these ships down into here in the name of the Monroe Doctrine. This is one of those rules where it's trying to be historically accurate, and just don't abuse it, you know. Lastly, for the Americans, and this is something that I failed to mention in the Commonwealth portion of this video, is going to be alignment of neutrals if they have war declared on them. This one is also pretty self-explanatory. So anytime the Axis players declare war on a neutral minor, it will either align to the Commonwealth or become a neutral minor of the Commonwealth if Great Britain isn't at war yet. So that's anywhere in Eurasia or Africa. So the main portion of the board, Africa, Europe, and Asia down here in the Middle East, all those are going to be aligned or become controlled minors of the Commonwealth. Alternatively, if any of the Axis players declare war in South America or Central America or the Bahamas, those countries will align or become a controlled minor of the United States. So, you know, it makes sense historically speaking. So the minors are pretty easy for the Allied powers. And keep in mind that if it's the Comintern player declaring war on a neutral minor, they will align to the German player, not to the Allies. Final thing to mention about the United States is if you look here on page 22, you've got your Allied alignment conditions, much like the German list of alignment conditions. The US has this special one right here. You know, you can do that if you want. It's up to you. Remember that if we look at the German alignment conditions, they can roll to align Argentina at some point. So I think this is America's way to counter that. You can do that if you'd like. You get some extra income for it, maybe. You know, it can cost you up to $3 to hit the roll, and you've only got a 25% chance to hit it. But you know, if you align Brazil, for example, you'll get $3 extra per turn. You know, so that's up to you if you want to do that. All right, let's move on to KMT. Okay, looking here at the KMT, they are going to operate in a very similar manner to the CCP, which is the Russian version of the Chinese. There are a few exceptions to this, which I will get to. But as always, first off here, we can see that they start with $6, so not a huge economy, but still 3 times bigger than the CCP. Moving on, you see that they have 3 victory points, which is actually quite a bit in the scheme of things. So the KMT are going to be very important to try to keep alive and support via Lend-Lease from the United States. And just like the CCP, if the KMT gets up to 13 IPPs of land zone value, it evolves to a full major power akin to any other in the game, which again is a very, very cool thing. It's pretty rare. Moving over here, we see that the KMT has the same build chart as the CCP. You can only build infantry, militia, cavalry, and mountain infantry. And the way the KMT can build artillery or anti-aircraft artillery is similar to Russia. What you're going to need to do is own Yunnan here and have the Commonwealth own Burma over here. So you're going to use this Burma road to purchase artillery and anti-aircraft artillery. That is going to be available to you if you are at war with Japan in July 1938. So again, the stipulations are it's got to be July of 1938 or later, and you must be at war with Japan. And you can buy artillery and anti-aircraft artillery via the Burma Road. It must be placed here in Yunnan. And also, this Burma Road is going to be your only source of wartime bonus income. So Yunnan is going to be a very important territory for you to keep track of. It's worth noting that you do not start in possession of Yunnan. It's a warlord here. And the only way that the KMT can align the warlords is if Japan attacks mainland China, every single warlord immediately aligns to the KMT. So that's going to be the most common way that it happens. Another way that it can happen is if the CCP attacks a warlord, that warlord will align to the KMT. So if for some reason the CCP attacks Yunnan and fails, then it will become a KMT territory. Other than that, the CCP is probably going to try to align it, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. Now, just like the CCP, the KMT can attack the warlords. Your units are going to be built in the same way as the CCP. You can build units in any territory that you've owned since the beginning of your turn, up to 3 units per territory. One more special thing about the KMT, which I think is pretty funny, is called a combat weakness. So anytime you're attacking a territory with infantry or a cavalry, they retreat at a 10, 11, or 12. So they just go back to the territory that they came from, which makes it extraordinarily difficult for the KMT to take any territory. You know, it doesn't sound like it'd be that bad, but in practice, those retreats really, really suck for you. So good luck with the KMT. Once you become a major power, that attack weakness goes away. But to begin with, it's going to be tough for you to get anything done, really. And that's all I got for the KMT. They operate very similarly to the CCP, except they don't get recruitment roles. They can't align the warlords unless the warlords are attacked by CCP or Japan. And they have that really, really bad attack weakness. Alright, that's all I got for the overviews, guys. We're going to move on to some other topics in our Learn Global War 1936 series here. I'll see you next time.